You are listening to Quality Time, a podcast designed to support Nebraskan providers through their journey with Step Up to Quality. I am your host, Colleen Schmidt. Get ready to listen as we prepare to elevate each other as we step up to quality. Welcome back, everyone. Today, our topic is on supporting children and families with healthy living. Today on the podcast, we have Ashton Figner. Ashton is located in Albion, and I was just sharing with her before we hit record, I have family in Albion, so it's a small world.
Yes.
It is. I'm so glad you're here with us, Ashton. You're the Go NAPSACC coordinator, and I also shared with Ashton before hitting record that I do not know hardly anything except the very little research I did before recording this podcast with you about Go NAPSACC. So I'm super excited that you're here. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about what you do and maybe even give us some of your background before you had this current job?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Colleen, for having me today. I'm really excited to be here and share a little bit about the work that we're doing across the state. So before we dive in, I know we'll get into this as we're talking, but there's so many acronyms that we use. And so I want to explain what Go NAPSACC is, and then we'll dive into, what I'm doing now and then some of the background. So Go NAPSACC stands for Nutrition and Physical Activity Self-Assessment for Childcare. And so we use the acronym because that can be a mouthful, but that's what that acronym stands for. So my current role, like Colleen said, I am the Go NAPSACC coordinator. And at a little bit of a broader level, I'm actually an extension educator with the Food, Nutrition, and Health team with UNL Extension. And so we were awarded a sub-award through DHHS that allows me to work primarily in this role, of being a Go NAPSACC coordinator. So I've been in this role for about a year and a half now. And previously, I did a lot of work with Go NAPSACC for about 4 years. So previously, I was an extension assistant with UNL Extension as well, where I taught nutrition education. So I was part of the NEP team, so Nutrition Education Program team. And I taught low-income individuals and families all about healthy eating and physical activity. And I also worked in this policy system and environmental work, and that's where Go NAPSACC falls into. So again, there's so many acronyms, and we understand that can be really confusing, but those of you who work in the field or understand what some of those PSE measures look like, that's where Go NAPSACC falls into. And so I was in my previous role for about 4 years. And that's where I was able to do a little bit of this Go NAPSACC work, and boy, has it changed in the 5 years that I've been working in it. And now that I'm in the coordinator role, it's been amazing to see just our new platform come to works. And it's an exciting time within our field. So I'm excited to share a little bit more and explain everything Go NAPSACC related.
How did you get interested in serving families and children and childcare providers with more info on healthy living?
I think in my previous position, the thing that I loved most was Go NAPSACC, and I loved being able to see it click with providers, with families, with parents. And I also just loved working in the schools. I guess, when I was working with the nutrition education program, seeing how much impact healthy living, physical activity can have on a child in their life. Some of those kids don't have much, but when you're able to encourage them to try a new fruit or a vegetable, or encourage them to go for a walk with their family, those small habits throughout their life can really drastically change a child's outcome. And so that's what's really empowering to me. And, as an adult, as we grow older, I think it's just as important to have those skills when we're little installed and just kind of put on a pretty high pedestal, because to be healthy doesn't mean just eating healthy. It can be trying, like I said, trying a different fruit or vegetable. It can be going for a walk. It can be kicking a soccer ball around. So we have to find the things that we love. And that's what's always really encouraging to me, is that every single person is so unique and different. And each child has their own, quirks and the things that they love. And so that's what kind of inspired me to work in this field, is just knowing that, every interaction that I have with the child, the parent, family member, child care provider, that I can make a difference every single time. We all deal with things that are heavy in life, but to be able to, go outside, go for a walk, and know that, hey, that's maybe something that I can do to better myself, is something that's really, really cool and encouraging to me.
Wow, I love your answer to that. That's a really solid why for what you do, Ashton. That's amazing. I really like what you said about how small habits can actually change a child's outcome in life.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for adults too. It's never too late to start those good habits and small changes. Talk to our listeners a little bit about the actual Go NAPSACC program. Like what is it? And when I was researching, I noticed there were 5 main health areas. So kind of give us a broad overview picture of what exactly is this? What's in it for me as a provider?
Yeah. So I explained a little bit about what Go NAPSACC stands for, but I'm going to say it again, because the more we hear it, the more we start to understand what the word means. And so it stands for Nutrition and Physical Activity Self-Assessment for Childcare. And so, in that title, we see that there's obviously self-assessment, but really what I try to explain when I'm explaining what Go NAPSACC is that we work with childcare sites to improve really the policies, the practices, and the environments in which the children are raised. And so when you think about that, that can be a little overwhelming, right? Like, that's a huge chunk of things that we're working on. But also, those are maybe some of the areas that these childcare sites are really struggling with. Like, every time I bring up policy, they're just like, oh, or they're like, yes, I have it done. So it's like one of two: either I have it done or I'm dreading doing that. Because, they don't have a ton of time to sit and do those things. But those are also the things that lead them to quality and help them to see maybe areas of improvement and best practices. And so ultimately, Go NAPSACC is a trusted process that helps childcare providers go that extra mile to support children's healthy eating and physical activity. So like you said, the 5 main health areas we focus on are child nutrition, breastfeeding and infant feeding, infant and child physical activity, outdoor play and learning, and then screen time. And so all of those 5 main health areas are things that they're doing every single day. I have some sites that come to me that are like, well, we don't even do screen time. And I'm like, that's wonderful. But we also talk about how just because you aren't doing screen time, we think about what's happening in our site, but we can't control what's happening when the child goes home, right? And so we're all around screens. It doesn't matter how much you're around a screen in a day. How in your site could we maybe enhance that? Could we give them different resources to hand out to parents and families? Could we maybe talk to parents about, what are some educational videos that they could watch at home instead of just dumping them in front of a screen and watching, all of the commercials and, all of the extra things that are kind of filled in during that screen time? How could we add physical activity into their days? And so all of these 5 main health areas are really interesting to dive into, because it helps to, and I know we'll kind of dive into this a little bit more, but when they take their self-assessment, it really sheds light of, like I've mentioned before, the areas of improvement, and then those areas that they're already really doing really well and meeting those best practices. And I always say that, it's the self-assessment is never a test, right? Like, it's just a baseline. It's ultimately an overview for this site to see and visually get an understanding of areas that they're doing really well in. And I really like it because sites look at that and they're like, I didn't even know that was a best practice, or I didn't even know that was something I should be focused on. Or, yeah, I do this all the time. I have a room set aside for, my parents that are breastfeeding. And so how can I help those mothers feel safe? How could I let them have privacy? And so as we dive into those self-assessments, it's really empowering and really interesting, I think, to see how confident the sites get after they go through with the Go NAPSACC process.
So I can really see how a self-assessment could help me if I'm an early childhood provider in Nebraska. What you just said, like highlight all the things I'm actually already doing really well, give me a place to kind of strive and go. Before we talk more about that, I have a curveball question that I want to ask you about screen time. Yeah. So screen time is one of my, like, you're preaching to the choir about we have to have healthy practices with that. Like, we have to have limits. What does some of the research say behind that, or how does Go NAPSACC? You mentioned providing resources for families. Are there recommendations that you are giving around screen time? What's that look like?
Yeah, so our whole module around screen time really is focused on the amount of screen time and then also the type of screen time that is being involved. So, I don't know that this is always I mean, everybody kind of has conflicting views on screen time. Some people are like, no, we should never have screen time. Where, I joke, but I'm like, I'm in front of a screen 8+ hours a day during my work time. So I also think that there are recommendations without looking at the actual module in front of me. I hate to just spew a number because, I think sometimes people take that very literally, and it's like, if you're going over that, you're doomed. If you're not, you're perfect. But I also look at it as a range. Like, we're probably in our lifetime going to be around a screen. And I think we also have to put limits and boundaries on what that screen time can look like. And so I'm not saying that you can never have screen time, because quite frankly, I have screen time. But we also have to kind of tap in and go, if I'm getting really anxious, or I'm noticing that the kids in my site just are really not liking what they're watching, or they're saying, they're acting out from the things that they're watching, maybe we should switch it. Maybe we should do something to get their heart rate up and moving. And so I always say you can pair physical activity and screen time. That's one way that I actually really do like working out and getting my physical activity, is to put something on the screen where I'm moving and I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And I hear providers do that a lot, where they're like, we put on music, but they're not really looking at the screen, they're just listening. And so they're like, is that okay? Does that count towards screen time? And I'm like, well, if they're not looking at the screen, I would say that that's fine. It's really more like the typical, what I envision of screen time, where it can be kind of negative, is you're sitting a child in front of the screen, not interacting with them, not talking about what they're seeing, right? And so that's kind of the when I view screen time, if you're interacting with them, asking them questions like, what did you just see on the screen? What did you learn from that episode that we just watched? Did you notice the color of, that person's shirt? And so really getting them to think and learn while they're sitting in front of that screen, that's where I view that it can be really positive. And also pairing like, maybe different cooking shows, so incorporating some child nutrition into it, incorporating physical activity into those screen time chunks of time that you're watching it. So I know that's kind of all over the place, but I think there's so much research that's still coming out with screen time, so it'll be really interesting to see in the next couple of years what comes out. But we have a really solid platform with a lot of resources for families and parents and providers.
Yeah, and I'm a mama, and I have not so little kids anymore, but when they were very young, I mean, they did have screen time for sure. Yeah. But there's a difference between having hours upon hours of screen time versus, hey, you've got 20 minutes, you can watch whatever little show you want. But I've also seen something cool happening lately with providers and using music and movement as screen. So what I've noticed is there are a lot of people who will pull the video up, but then they don't have it on the screen. Like they turn the iPad around, or they move the kids to a different area so they aren't watching the screen. Because I notice when children are doing music and movement with screen, a lot of times they just stop in their tracks.
Yep, and we're watching it. Yeah.
Right? Like watch the colors, watch the stuff going all over the screen versus actually watching a provider's mouth say the language, or engage in like the movement or build community. So I agree with you. Like, I think that's a loaded curveball question I threw at you. Everyone has really, really strong opinions about what healthy screen time looks like, especially for young children and for adults too, like what's healthy for me.
Right.
Yeah. So thanks for answering that. That was
absolutely
something that came up. I was like, ooh, I want to ask her about this.
Yeah.
Okay. Talk to our listeners about the actual process. Like, let's say we have people listening and they're like, okay, I'm intrigued. What is the process and the steps for Go NAPSACC?
Yeah, so to get started, if you're interested, and I knew this question would get popped up, our website is a little funky, and so we're housed within the university system, and so maybe what I'll do, Colleen, is I'll just share the link, and then you
Yeah.
can share that in the show notes.
Yep.
But the first step is to enroll for Go NAPSACC, and so at this point, what happens is they will go to our website and they will click on, enroll for a new site, and so they click on that little button. And at that point, it takes them to a Google Sheet where there's just a few questions that I ask to kind of figure out where they're located, if they're a center or a home. And then what I'm doing is I'm actually taking all that information and then I'm looking at our consultants across the state and I'm pairing them with a consultant. And so I'm reaching out to this provider, understanding their timeline. Some are working with Step Up to Quality, some are not.
Mm-hmm.
We can kind of get into that as well. But some providers come to me and they're like, I have a pretty short timeline. I need to be done within a couple months, or I need to be done within a month. And so I'm figuring out who across the state has capacity to be able to work with that provider in the time that they need. And so the first step is enrolling. And then after that, they're paired with their consultant. And then this is when the consultant is really talking them and walking them through every single step. So the first step is taking that pre-self-assessment. And this assessment is, again, like I talked about, a really great overview of what's happening in the site. It's not a test. We don't expect you to get all the right answers. And I don't really want you to get all the right answers. Like, I love when there's areas of improvement, because that shows me that you're interested in working on those areas of quality. And then also that gives us a really good starting point of where we can take off and start. So I always remind providers, again, it's not a test. You can't fail the assessment. And it gives us a lot of pieces of information of what we're looking for in the site. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not looking for certain things, but it just helps to give me kind of a path of which way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part is the action planning process. So the action planning process is really where we're looking at the self-assessments. The consultant and the provider are looking at them together. This may be an in-person meeting. This may be over Zoom, depending on your location or what your preference is. I've also done this over phone as well. So again, just depending on what you like and what you need, what feels best. So you're looking at the assessment, and then the consultant is kind of guiding you and helping you figure out how many goals should we pick for that area. And so again, it's all provider driven. So the provider gets to pick which goals that they really like and which goals that maybe they don't want to touch. And I always, make that very clear when I'm meeting with providers of, this is your action plan. These are your goals. I have some goals that I really like working on with providers, but that doesn't matter because it depends on what you want and what you want for your site. So the action planning process is really key, a really key part of the process, because we're setting those goals and then we're actually walking through and creating a step-by-step and kind of instruction guide of how we're going to get to those goals. So once all of those goals are set, and we usually like to start with 2 or 3 per section, but or per health module, but I've had sites that have 5 plus. It just depends on what they're thinking they can take on at that time. And then the third step is really taking action. So that's where we want to see progress, slowly being made, and then also crossing those goals off. So that's where the work starts to happen and they're working towards completing their goals. The fourth, I would say this fourth step kind of, it can be before the action planning process, during the action planning process, or after. And this is the training modules. So all of our training modules are self-paced in our new NAPSACC web platform, which is amazing. I really like the self-paced modules because you can take them at any time of the day. And this is one thing that I've heard from providers over and over is just that, they may have a chunk over lunch that they can take 20 minutes. They may have a 20-minute break during nap time that they can watch a short video. And so this is really helpful because they can do it at any time that best suits them. And I really appreciate that. And I feel like they really appreciate that well. There are knowledge checks in between, but I always say that as long as you're watching, you'll be able to answer those, and they're not overly complicated questions. And then the last final piece is to take a post assessment. And so they just call in the platform, they just call them assessments, but they call them like initial assessments. But I like to kind of say pre and post just because it helps, to kind of understand, oh, yes, we're taking this before and we're taking this after. So that post assessment is always really interesting. It's interesting to see all of the different goals that they have achieved in such a short period of time. And really that's where the celebration's happening, right? Like Go NAPSACC is it's a continual process. So we're never necessarily done. But this post-assessment, I feel like is a really vital piece of kind of, wrapping up, but also we're still working on these goals. We still want to see these goals being met year after year when we see you, or whenever, every 5 years that we see you. So that's a really quick overview of what the process looks like. But for each provider, they're going to be walking through those steps. It may feel different though for each provider. We have 24 consultants across the state. And so you can also find our map of consultants on the Go NAPSACC website, which I will send to Colleen. She can post on the show notes. But if you see that your county isn't filled, so there's like the dark gray is where our consultants are housed. If you notice that you're in a light gray area, though, don't be alarmed because that's where myself and then we also have another statewide consultant that we do a lot of that work in kind of those light gray areas. So everybody is filled across the state and nobody will be left behind. That's for sure.
I really love how you mentioned that this is a continual process. Like there's no I don't just check this off and be done. But I also really enjoy that you're saying how provider driven it is. Mm-hmm. Like I'm in the driver's seat. I get to set my goals. I get to work with my consultant and say, this is what we are focusing on. And it sure sounds like you figured out how to make it very provider friendly, like those little 20-minute snippets that we have sometimes during the day to get stuff done.
Yeah. So I guess that's something else that I can mention is we just launched into our brand new Go NAPSACC website in January. So Go NAPSACC originated out of North Carolina, and for years before I started, we had our own Nebraska kind of system. And the system worked. It worked for what we needed. And when I started in this role, we were able to, get the funding that we were able to be part of that national system, which has a lot of perks to it. So change is always hard because you're so used to the old system and the ways that we did it. But this new system is amazing because of those self-paced learning modules, because of the expansive library and resources. I feel like that's also, so the self-paced modules are wonderful. I would almost say that the library and tips and materials is even better. It's categorized by all the different health areas. And the providers can go in, download, print, put it on different portals, whatever works best for them. And they have full access to that and it's completely free. And so that's what I feel like a lot of my providers have said, I don't have time to sit and look for all the materials. I just don't, but I need quality materials to hand out to families that make it look like I spend a lot of time on them. And so, this is one really easy way of being able to star the materials, print them out, download them. And I always say, make your own file folder for child nutrition. And, whenever you want to hand out materials to families, you can pull one of those out, you can copy them out to families, and you're done with that for the year. And so it makes it really easy and simple. But I also think providers are learning a lot just by downloading those materials. So it's really, the new system has made it so provider friendly that I really appreciate that too, because the feedback has been really good. And so that makes the change a little easier.
Yeah, I always think too, if you have resources that you can give to families versus just saying like, I think at home you shouldn't have this much screen time. Like it's a different feel if it's like, look, here's this actual research-based article or resource, and I'm giving you that because I thought it was interesting. Like that comes across different. It comes across less judgy, less more supportive, more collaborating. Yeah. Well, the theme of our season 3 podcast is advocacy. And you've kind of already touched on this, but sum up for us, how do you view Go NAPSACC as a form of advocacy for children and families in Nebraska?
I think there's so many different ways that Go NAPSACC is a form of advocacy, but I think ultimately it helps providers and it helps, I would even say families and children to some aspect to advocate for some of those best practices within their site and by promoting some of those healthy environments. So really for childcare providers, I would say that Go NAPSACC really helps to promote those healthy environments, because without knowing what a best practice is, it's really hard and overwhelming to understand. Colleen and I were talking about this earlier, but there's so many different organizations that are part of childcare, and how wonderful that is. Like, that's such a good thing, but it can feel so overwhelming when it's like, I just don't know where to go. And so that's what I always, really, really try hard with providers to understand that, like, we're here to help you. I don't know that I'm going to give you all the answers. I really don't. And, but I do know, and I'm very confident in myself that I can help to find people who can help you. And so, if that's one thing, that a provider comes in and is able to get those resources from us to be able to feel a little more confident as they're going through maybe their step up to quality rating, or feeling a little more confident that they have enough points for that rating, that's really what I'm hoping for. And I'm hoping that when they get done with Go NAPSACC, that they leave feeling refreshed and, overall just feeling good about themselves, because we don't always hear how good we're doing. And it doesn't matter what profession you're in, but childcare providers especially, I think, don't always hear thank you, and don't always hear you're doing the things. You're doing the really hard things, and you've made tremendous progress. And so there's so many, this question, when I was thinking about it, I was like, there's so many different ways that we can help families and parents and childcare providers and children, advocate for what they need and what they want. But I don't know. I think there's so, like I said, my brain just kind of spirals, because I just think that Go NAPSACC plays such a critical role in advocating for that health, nutrition and well-being of children, that, we're giving this comprehensive approach. And I just hope that ultimately that providers, children, and families, and anyone that kind of comes in contact with Go NAPSACC, that they're able to walk away feeling better than when they came. So that's really my goal. And I don't know, that would be my answer.
I love that answer. I'm leaving feeling better than before I came. I'm leaving feeling affirmed. I'm leaving feeling prepared for my step up to quality journey a little bit better. Like, that's a really good way to phrase it, Ashton. I think that's perfect. Yeah, well, that's wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I learned a lot today. This was helpful for me. I will put in the show notes the link to the webpage that our listeners can kind of find you at and get more info. So thanks again for joining us, Ashton.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And if you have any additional questions, I'll also put my email that Colleen can put in the show notes as well. So please feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to guide you and help you along the process.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for joining and spending quality time with us again. Please join as we chat about our future topics to support our Nebraskan providers on their journeys with Step Up to Quality. Until next time, bye-bye.